If there's one thing I've learned about South Park fans, it's that they tend to be pretty passionate about their favorite episodes. And by pretty passionate, I mean really, really passionate. And as someone who has shared their opinion on literally every episode of the show to millions of people, you could imagine that occasionally I might make some people a bit upset with my opinions. And by occasionally, I mean every single time. One thing I've discovered in my time sifting through comments telling me to off myself is that South Park is unique to almost any other show in its lack of unanimous fan opinions. With most shows, there are at least a few episodes that the fanbase will designate as being the worst or best. Obviously, there's always going to be the people that disagree, but for the most part, there's a general consensus on these episodes. This is not the case with South Park. It doesn't matter how bad you think an episode is, there will always be a substantial group of people who would rather die than admit that it's not the best episode in the entire series. So in general, South Park opinions are already very polarizing. Despite this, the comments on my ranking video have made me aware that one particular episode still manages to stand out for just how incredibly polarizing it is. With this particular episode, I don't think I've ever seen a neutral opinion on it. It seems like everyone thinks it's either an episode crafted by the Lord himself to be the funniest thing ever created, or it's the work of an evil satanic being who created it solely to declare that the show will never be funny again. By now, you may have guessed what episode I'm referring to. I know many of you have been waiting for this, and after really thinking it over, discussing it with my closest friends and family, talking to a lawyer, and studying every single opinion online, I think now is finally the right time to talk about it. That's right, it's finally happening. The most polarizing episode of South Park is I Should Have Never Gone Ziplining. You didn't really think I was going to talk about that episode, right? There's nothing polarizing about it. It's an objective fact that if you think it's a good episode, you're wrong and you shouldn't be allowed to have opinions, and I'm sure as hell not going to spend a whole video proving it. Actually, I'll tell you what. If this video gets 50,000 likes, I'll make an entire video doing a deep dive into the episode and the character. Fortunately for my mental health, that will not happen, and I will never have to talk about this little French kid ever again. Tangent aside, we're going to talk about the Season 16 episode, I Should Have Never Gone Ziplining. It's fascinating to me just how divisive this episode is, and I wanted to figure out why. Why do people love it? Why do people hate it? I needed to figure out which group has the correct opinion and which group is full of brain-dead illiterate buffoons that have invalidated all of their future opinions, because as we all know, that's how opinions work nowadays. And of course, it's common knowledge that all of the best opinions on the internet come from two places, Twitter and Reddit. So after hours of research and a noble sacrifice from all of my brain cells, I think I found the answer. So, with the intro out of the way, let's get into it. This is a deep dive into South Park's most polarizing episode. Let's start by breaking down what exactly happens in this episode. From the first few seconds, it's immediately clear that this is not your typical South Park episode. There's a dramatic montage of the boys seemingly in danger, along with a narrator describing their trip from hell. It ends with a title card and a disclaimer stating that it's a true story. Now, if you get what this is referencing, that greatly improves your odds of enjoying this episode. If not, well, you may be out of luck. It's a parody of a show that ran from 2005 to 2012 on the Discovery Channel called I Shouldn't Be Alive. Basically, the show would tell the story of a person or group of people who got stuck in the wilderness and survived in some crazy situation. It recreated the scenarios with actors and included interviews with the survivors discussing what happened. It was a pretty entertaining show, assuming you enjoyed hearing stories about people fighting off bears and their best friends dying from hypothermia. That was a pretty good portion of the show. As a young child, I loved the show. I loved how dramatic it was and how certain survivors wouldn't be interviewed until the very end, so you never knew if they made it out until the story was over. It was one of those shows that I'd watch if nothing good was on the kids' channels, like when Nickelodeon decided to play Fanboy and Chum Chum for hours on end. Yeah, even as a 10-year-old, I would rather watch people forced to amputate their own limbs than watch that show. And now as an adult, I think I'd rather amputate my own limbs than watch it. But this episode fully leans into the parody, including the dramatic camera work, the interviews with the survivors, and they even got one of the actual narrators from the show to do the narration.
4 young boys in Colorado are on a trip from hell.
We follow the boys as someone suggests that they go ziplining, and they decide to try it out. They're all in a great mood as they head to the facility, making fun of Kenny for having herpes, a cold sore. When they arrive, they learn that they're going to be ziplining with a group of people, and their mood immediately shifts. The narrator then discusses the physiological responses their bodies have to dealing with a tour group, like how the brain has to work overtime to act nice and pretend to care about the other people. Things only get worse as they have to wait an extra 30 minutes for a late couple and force a smile once they arrive. Then comes the safety video, which is another 15 minutes of pure hell, followed by group members asking redundant questions about the video.
Could we review the best ways to hold the rope again?
Really? You're gonna make us all listen to it again because you couldn't understand? Really?
Finally, they leave and the boys are excited to start ziplining, only to have their hope crushed when they realize that they have to take a 45-minute shuttle ride to the top of the mountain.
His brain is already lacking excitement, and now just the word shuttle makes Kyle's brain fire neurons that bring up memories of just how lame shuttles can be.
Along the way, they are forced to talk with the rest of the tour group, including a man who tells a riveting story about his life. He continuously repeats that he's making a long story short, despite the fact that he does not, in fact, make a long story short, as it continues for the entire ride.
Well, my name's Pete Nichols, and this is my wife, Donna. And, make a long story short, you know, make a long story short, and that's when, you know, long story short, we just,
Meanwhile, we get a look into the disaster brewing within Cartman's stomach, as the fast food he's consumed combines with the massive amounts of Mountain Dew he's drinking, creating a deadly gas. When they finally arrive at the first zipline, a member of the group asks about the biology of the trees in the area, further crushing the spirit of the boys. When Cartman finally rides the zipline, he relays to the rest of the boys that their biggest fear has come true.
Oh, really? Yeah, dude, it's boring as shit.
And as if it couldn't get any worse, they realize that they have to wait for everyone else to ride the zipline as well. And then, the unthinkable happens.
This is a zipline tour. We got 16 more to go.
And it was like, wham!
Their nightmare is far from over. This is likely the second major part of the episode that split fans, since it's another reference to a rather niche experience. Anyone who's been ziplining or has ever just been on a guided tour like this would understand just how underwhelming and annoying they can be, but if you haven't, you wouldn't be able to relate to this episode at all. The boys start calling for help, but no one is around to hear. Kyle and Cartman argue over whose idea it was to go in the first place, not realizing that it was Stan's idea all along. If you didn't find their ziplining boredom to be funny in the first place, you're not gonna like this episode, since it continues like this for the next 10 minutes. They add different elements, like Cartman switching to drinking the legendary Double Dew, which has double the amount of sugar and caffeine as normal Mountain Dew, causing his intestinal nightmare to worsen. They eventually stop for lunch, where they have a wide array of delicious options.
We got turkey, ham,
Cartman then switches to drinking Diet Double Dew. Double Dew with only half the sugar and caffeine of regular Double Dew, but his condition continues to worsen. Stan tells the tour guide that they have a medical emergency and need to leave, but the only way down is ziplining. Stan discovers that there's a horse ranch nearby, and they ask to take the horses down the mountain, and the rancher agrees. They think that they are finally saved, but these feelings quickly fade when they realize that they'll be with another tour group on horses that travel only 4 miles an hour. They are trapped in a never-ending purgatory of tour groups, turkey ham sandwiches, and long story short. Kyle begins to fade, and Stan decides that he's gonna find a way out of here. He finds a marina nearby and tells the boys that they can take a boat back to town. As if this episode wasn't bizarre enough already, when the boys get on the boat, it suddenly switches to live action, with actors playing the roles of the boys. This is the final major point that likely split viewers' opinions, as it is so absurd and stupid that it's either hilarious or just incredibly stupid. They continue with the same jokes about how bored they are, but in an even more serious tone since the actors are so overly dramatic. Kyle comes up with an idea to share the Mountain Dew that Cartman's drinking, and in doing so, everyone gets herpes from Kenny. When they check on Kenny, they learn that he's died from boredom.
Oh my god, they killed Kenny! You bastards!
Kyle and Cartman once again argue about whose idea it was, until Stan finally confesses that it was his idea to go ziplining. He reveals that by signing up 3 friends, he got a free iPod Nano. They all cry as they accept that they will be stuck there forever, but their prayers are finally answered when a certain someone swoops in to save the day.
You came for us, Mr. Hanky! Thank you, Mr. Hanky.
Howdy ho, boys. Let's get you back home.
After an absolutely grueling 4 hours in the wilderness, they are saved by Mr. Hanky. We get a montage of how their lives have changed since the incident, with Kyle spending 27 days in the hospital, Cartman continuing to drink Diet Double Do, and Stan dedicating his life to raising awareness of the risks of ziplining.
His awareness videos became so popular that Stan once again ended up jacking it in San Diego.
So now that we fully understand what happens in this episode, I'm still a little lost on some parts, let's try to figure out why the public opinion is so split. Let's start with the obvious. This is one of the most unique episodes in the entire show. It's incredibly experimental and bizarre, as it adheres so strictly to the format of the show that they're parodying. Obviously, they've done similar things in the past, but never quite to the extent of this one. Anytime a show dramatically changes its style, there's always going to be mixed opinions about it, and regardless of your opinion of the episode, it takes a lot of courage to take a risk and make an episode that switches it up as much as this one, and I think that's commendable. Kinda like the last video I made, it's a comprehensive history of mega tsunamis and how scary they are, and I think it's a really good video you should check out. Sorry for the self-promo. But as we all know, people tend to not like change, and especially with a show like South Park that has had such a consistent formula for literal decades, you could imagine that a lot of people don't take kindly to such a sudden change. Another big factor in this divisiveness is the parody itself. As I previously mentioned, the entire episode is a parody of I Shouldn't Be Alive. Parody in South Park has a rocky history, with some of the best and worst episodes being direct parodies of something. The tricky thing about committing an entire episode to a parody is that the humor can't just be referential. What I mean by that is it needs to be funny even if you don't get the references. An episode that did this right is the Lord of the Rings episode, whose name is way too long. When I first watched this episode, I had never seen Lord of the Rings, but it was still one of my favorite episodes because it doesn't rely on references to be funny. If you have watched Lord of the Rings and get the references, it makes the episode even funnier, but if you haven't, it's still a funny episode. It's also one of the most popular franchises in history, so chances are you've seen it. This episode, on the other hand, parodies a somewhat niche show. And while it was still popular at the time, it's definitely no Lord of the Rings. If you have seen the show and watched this episode, you'd know that the parody is spot on, and that alone is probably enough to enjoy it. But if you haven't seen it, all the jokes that are referencing the show, things like the narrator repeatedly saying a trip from hell, the x-ray shots explaining what's happening to the body, the interviews, the updates on the survivors, and the overly dramatic music and camera work would be totally lost on you. These are some of the funniest parts of the episode, and if you don't get it, there's a pretty good chance you just find this episode boring. Obviously that's the point since they're so bored from ziplining, but it's only funny if you get that they put this boring, low-stakes situation into a format that's normally used for dramatic life or death situations. And that brings us to our next point, relatable humor. Relatable humor is very similar to parody in that if you don't relate, it's not funny. After watching a lot of South Park, there are times when it's obvious that Matt or Trey recently experienced something and decided to make an entire episode about it. In this case, it's clear that one of them went ziplining, hated it, and decided to turn their experience into an episode. If you've been ziplining, or more generally on a guided excursion, you understand how relatable all of this is. The safety videos, the group members that won't stop talking, the overly enthusiastic guides, the free lunch, and just how disappointing everything is. As someone who's been ziplining, they really nailed everything. But again, if you've never experienced this, which let's face it, is the majority of people, you wouldn't get any of this. Sure, you could probably imagine what it's like, but until you actually experience it, you wouldn't truly understand. The relatable ziplining humor ends up taking up the majority of the episode, so if you don't get it, you're out of luck. So you're probably starting to see why this episode is so divisive. The humor in it is highly reliant on the parody and relatable humor. If you get both of these references, you probably think it's hilarious. If you get one and not the other, you may or may not like it, and if you aren't familiar with the parody and have never been ziplining, all that's left is fart jokes and the live action segment. Speaking of the live action segment, that's our last point of divisiveness. The sudden change to real actors is definitely jarring, and finding it funny really comes down to how you felt about the episode leading up to this. If you hated the rest of the episode, you'll probably think it's ridiculously stupid and cringeworthy. If you love the rest of the episode, you'll probably appreciate the absolute absurdity of it. The episode also has a lot of gross out humor throughout, and for me personally, the switch to live action makes it clear that gross out humor should be left in animated form, because it's a lot harder to watch with real people. The ending with Mr. Hanky coming to save them is completely random and unrelated, but again, the enjoyment will come down to how you felt about the absurdity of the live action segment in the first place.
You bastard! You bastard, Stan!
To summarize this episode in simple terms, it's weird. There are so many different factors that contribute to whether you'll enjoy it or not, and the combination of these factors is what makes it seem like everyone either loves or hates this episode. If you like all three main factors, you love it. If you like one or two of them, maybe you like it, maybe you don't. And if you don't like any of them, you hate it. When you break it down like this, it's clear to see why it's so divisive. So now that we understand why everyone feels the way they do, it's time to decide who has the correct opinion. Obviously, this will be a reflection of my own opinion, since my opinions are always correct. So, do I think I Should Have Never Gone Ziplining was sent down from the heavens by God himself to be the funniest piece of media ever created, or did it rise from the depths of hell to end comedy for all eternity? Well, to put an end to this debate forever, in my incredibly important and objectively true opinion, yeah, it's alright. Mid-tier episode.
Oh my god!
The
No
brush,
way,
the
what is
brush.
Oh no!
What
no.
the Gamma Doppler butterfly knife.
Oh my god, another knife.
Yeah,
Oh my gosh.
What is it?
Oh, it's
That's a.
Vector.
I mean, like, Jesus
Oh
Christ.
my god!
Oh, you got a knife.
Oh my god!
I know
this.
Oh
Holy
my
shit!
god.
Oh my god! Oh my god! Oh my god! Oh my god! Oh my god!
Oh my
Oh my
fucking
god!
god.
Oh my fucking god! Oh my fucking god! Oh my fucking god! Oh my fucking god! Oh my fucking god!
Oh my
Oh my
god.
fucking
There's
god!
Nami in the
Oh my
background.
god!
Is it factoring in?
Oh